host, Shirley Adams, for the Sewing Connection, Series 17, Program 8. A lot of you sewers are also quilters, and all those little pieces you join together might be considered color blocking, but usually colors are in bigger blocks and you may have different reasons for putting them together. I have, for example, 3 different outfits in silk suitings in deep jewel colors, and when there's a scrap of each left over, well, let's rerun them into something new. The 3 colors I have are in this vest, obviously, and it's purple and blue and green, and so I do have a skirt to go with each one of them. Just leave the jackets off and wear the vest instead for a little cooler look, and do some color blocking. Use up those little extra pieces and have a new outfit in the long run. What also is nice about this is so that you can put different things together. For instance, maybe I would wear this purple skirt with a bright green blouse, which I wouldn't ordinarily do, but this vest that has the 3 colors in it, it gives you permission to combine things that you wouldn't have otherwise. Well, there are several ways of color blocking, and one way is down here on the table. This is one that I started several series ago and just haven't finished yet, but I will. I just found it and I like it. Now, what I have done with this one is just take this t-shirt fabric and I've simply laid these squares on. I didn't fuse them because I wanted to keep it soft. Anytime you fuse, it's going to stiffen it a little bit. So I just laid these little pieces here and there, and then it's being covered by twill tape every place. So that's what's there. It's all commercial tapes that you can buy in the store, and they come in different widths. That's one way of color blocking. There are no seams there. Another way of color blocking is on the mannequin, and this is where I had just little scraps left of various knits, and so these are run together on the serger, just very easily sewn together, and then afterwards, to soften the joinings a little bit, I put some yarn over it, couched it on top of the joinings, and that's another way of doing it. There are several other ways, and we might get to them before the end of this program, but I want to get to this vest first of all. So when you think about how to do it, to color block something of this sort, if you are going to do it, for instance, that way that's back there on the mannequin, if you were going to do just those strips, just straight lines every place, you could build the fabric first if you wanted to. Just go ahead and join several pieces of fabric together, then put your pattern on and cut it out, and that's exactly what I did for that one. But for this one that I'm wearing, I can't do that because this one has curved lines, and so there's no way to just join those curved lines and then cut it out later. You're going to have actual pattern pieces when you join curved lines. So here's how I started out. I took a standard pattern, and I'm never going to cut up my sacred basic patterns. They always stay intact. What I will do instead is trace it, make a duplicate of it, which I've done here on some pattern paper, and then this is what I'm going to cut up to make my pattern for the vest. Now think about how you want to color block that. Those lines could go any direction you wanted to. They could be vertical. I at first considered doing them horizontally, but if you just do straight lines horizontally and have big color blocks there, it is going to make you look blockier and it's going to make you look wider, and maybe this isn't the effect that you want to achieve. So I finally decided mine would be more flattering if I would do sort of curved lines and go up. What that does is make the shoulders maybe a little broader and minimize some other part. And think also which colors you want where, because the darker colors I wanted in my larger parts and the lighter colors up here, so it maybe tends to look bigger and broader. So think about that. And then when I had it thought through, I just drew some lines on this. And where I drew these lines, plan ahead, think ahead always, I decided that I wanted to have about 3 buttons on this. So do I have 3? Yes, I have 3. Okay. I wanted to have buttons approximately here and here and here. And so this is why I drew my lines in the places where I did. Because if you're going to have buttons, you'll need buttonholes. If you're going to have seams and color block, you might as well have inseam buttons. So I drew my seams kind of like this. I did one through here and came out, and another one through here, because they are going to form buttonholes as well as just having lines cut apart. Now I don't want to distort it with that dart, so after I cut these lines apart, here's the intermediate stage, after they were cut apart, I then just pinned out the darts, because what this does is make different shapes, but when they all go together, they would make the same complete shape as this one would with its dart. So you're doing the same thing, you're just eliminating some extra lines that aren't going to help you any. So then this was the second stage, but as I folded out the dart, notice what happens here. It kind of juts around as it's folded, and that won't work. So usually I would just put this on the fabric and cut it out and add seam allowances. Any place I cut apart, I've got to add seams to it so that I have something to sew together again. But here, because I have those funny angles, I thought I better true those lines and cut them out first. So here's the final step. Here's my final pattern. And it's not a bad idea to number them so you don't have to end up putting together a jigsaw puzzle. So here was number 1 at the top, and also so that you don't get confused, write which fabric it's going to be, which color. Here is 2 over here, and I better put it on grain because this is the nice thing about using this dotted pattern paper, the fact that it furnishes grain lines for you because of all the dots. They're, of course, just squared off. So here is how it is, and you can see I added a seam allowance every place I cut. I didn't add any seam allowances around the outer edge because they were already there and didn't need to be added. So here is piece 3, and here is piece 4, here's the center front. Okay, that's how it was. So they were just all cut out of different fabrics. Green here, I had a couple of blues there, and then the purple over here. And so once you have it labeled, you can't make any mistakes. And very often what I do is also make little hash marks. I didn't here because it was just a small piece and it was going to fit together easily, so I didn't. But very often while it's still all together, I make hash marks across there. And then when I add the seams, that forms the notches, so I know how to sew it together. Well, this one didn't need it. What I did need on this is a buttonhole. So a buttonhole is always the size of the button's diameter plus its thickness. So whatever that is, usually you add 1/8 of an inch. The buttons that I have here are covered buttons with a little design stitched on them. And because of that, because it's covered in the silk fabric, it's going to be a little harder to get through the buttonhole. Therefore, you'll want to make the buttonhole slightly larger than you ordinarily would, just so it can button easily, if you ever button it. Standardly, I wear my jackets and vests open, I guess, and don't button them all that much. But anyway, I decided how big that buttonhole should be. And once in a while, when I need to test this, if I don't really know for sure, I'll just cut a slash that big in a piece of fabric and see if the button goes through easily so that you can test it and know exactly what you're doing. But then you go ahead and cut this out, and then you're going to sew it together. And when I sew this, I'll just sew down to where the buttonhole is going to start and back stitch and leave an open space there. And then here I'll back stitch up to the other edge of the buttonhole and out to the edge of the fabric. So with this open space, after you have it sewn, you on the ironing board, just press this seam open, and then you have a buttonhole already there. How you get it all together is when you put the lining or the facing, whatever you're going to have on the back, that's what holds it all together by just whipping around the buttonhole. And then you don't have to worry that all you had really was an open place in that seam. It all works out beautifully. So rather than have any extra lines like extra buttonholes, this just seemed like a good place to do it. It's kind of a nice way to do it, a more expensive way maybe to do it, which is always my preference. Well, what I'm going to do is sew these 2 curved pieces together then. And that's where you have some problems, because how are we going to sew this inside curve to this outside curve that's here in order to put the 2 pieces together? So let's go over on the sewing machine and see exactly how that works. It's going to be just straight stitching, so you set it for straight stitch, which I already have on there. And then in order to sew an inside and an outside curve together, you better have some clips before you ever start. Now naturally, when you press this open, you're going to have to clip this inside curve seam, but you also are in order to stitch it together. And these are exactly the same size, I believe, yes, at the actual stitching line, which will be a 5/8 line. They are the same length. So what I usually would do, I'll go ahead and stitch this here, and or slash it, pardon me. Oh, about, depending on how big a curve it is. If it's real curvy, you're going to need to slash it pretty close together. If it's just a gentle curve, as this one is, then it's fine to just do them inch, inch and a quarter apart, as I've done. All you want to make sure this does is open up into a straight line, and then it's going to work just fine for you. Now also, I need to mark on this Where the center front is, I would mark that on my vest so I know where the center front is. The buttonhole always starts a little bit toward the center from the center front, a little bit the other side of it, and then continues this way into the right side of your garment as far as it needs to. But I would have those marks there with some a pen mark, a fabric marker. And then I'm going to just go ahead and pin this together, and I'll put a pin right here where I would want my buttonhole to start, and I'll put another pin at the other edge where I would want my buttonhole to end, and then the rest of it can just be pinned together. Ordinarily, when I'm going to make another little slash right here because it's pulling, and if you just make slashes in the right place, you can see how this just opens up and it doesn't give you any problems at all. If it doesn't open up smoothly, then make another slash here or there wherever you need to. And I'm going to go ahead and put pins, and then you just pull out these pins as you sew along the seam, right, as you come to them. But this is sort of pin basting, it's very often called, and it's just a good way to do it to make sure everything is going to work out just right the way you want it to. So put a couple more pins in and we'll be at the other end, and it should end up just exactly right here at the 5/8 line, since that's the way I cut it originally, and it seems to be doing just that. Isn't it nice when everything works out the way it's supposed to? And if it doesn't, then we improvise and make it work out anyway, one way or another. Okay, I'm just going to sew a 5/8 seam here, just a regular seam, and I'm going to stitch up to the buttonhole where I want it to be, where the pin is, and then I'm going to right now put the needle down position, and then when I get up to the buttonhole, I will back stitch. And know how your machine works. Does it go one stitch beyond in order to back stitch, which this one does? And that gives you an opportunity to get everything going just right before you actually push the button. So that's always a good deal. And then I'll do the same thing on the other side. I want to go over here, and I want to back stitch right up to that other pin. And then when I get up to the pin, I'm pushing the wrong button. It helps enormously if you just push the right button. Okay, now we're back stitching. And I'll take out the pin, and it'll go back one more before it starts to come forward. And then just take out these pins as you come to them, but this is just a regular 5/8 inch stitching line. And then of course, after you get it stitched, you would take it to the iron and open up that seam and back stitch at the other end. I didn't bother to do that, and I'm also not going to bother to press this, but you can see there I've got my open place for the buttonhole, so everything would work out beautifully. And once you take it to the ironing board then and press it, because it's all clipped, it would also press open easily. Now it could be, if it seems bulky on the outside curve, which the purple is in this case, if it seems bulky there, you might also either want to clip it or make little notches in it in order for it to press out. And then what I've also done on this is just had some fun. This machine is just full of all this whole array of decorative stitches, and so I might as well use some of them. I'm going back to the menu and do the advanced stitches here, the more bigger numbered ones. And I think I'm going to try out some dent stitches, always fun. Oh, I kind of like 1/16, so I'll go up to that. And what I'm doing, of course, is looking up here at the display so I can see exactly what stitch number it is that I want, because there is such a big choice. And I have a choice of 150 of them there, I see. But I wanted, what did I say, 1/16. So I want this stitch right here. So let's see what that does. This is a stitch that I have on my vest. And I might do it up real close to hold that seam down flat, or because I haven't pressed this, I'll do it a little ways away. Now ordinarily when you do these decorative stitches, it's a good idea, and especially the dense ones, such as one that I'm doing, it's a good idea to have a foot that has a little indentation under the platform so that it makes room for that thread, that decorative thread. Here also I would probably use the rayon or the acrylic threads, or maybe a metallic thread instead of the regular sewing thread, but I'm just going to leave this in. It'll be fine. And what I would do with this is try to do the stitch so that it's parallel to the seam. I would just keep watching the space between the seam and the edge of the foot and resist the temptation to watch the needle because that's when you go a little crooked, and I would just want to get an equal spacing all along here. So we're ready to go ahead and see what this does. And this is just a pretty stitch. I love to use these decorative stitches and do some different things. And on small garments especially, maybe if you were making a tailored suit, you wouldn't want to put decorative stitches like this on it. But I love small garments like vests, or something that you can kind of go wild on and do some of the fun things that you don't want to do on standard garments that you would wear for years and years. And I'm going to stitch over this thread if I don't pull it out. Okay. Well, anyway, you can see this is pretty easy. The machine does the thing. All I am doing is trying to maintain an even distance here. And if you have a problem doing that, remember that you have with your machine undoubtedly a gauge. There's a gauge that attaches back here in back of the needle bar or in back of the presser foot. And that gauge would tell you where the seam is and where you want to stitch, because you just adjust it accordingly. So that makes it very easy. Anyway, here's a nice stitch. Or you might want to, on the other one, see what other stitches you have, which is what I've done on the vest. I did several different stitches. One of its neighbors, I kind of like those little hearts, 113. Let's see what that looks like on the other side. And I'm not going to go to the other side because it wouldn't show up in the purple. I'd need to change to a different color thread if I'd do that. So let's just see what that little heart looks like, because you might want to do several rows. Now, if you think that these are, oh, just for little girls' clothes, no, they aren't. They're for big girls' clothes, too, because they're fun. And so find excuses to use these decorative stitches if you have them on your machine, just because they're fun. They add something extra. Go also look at Ready to Wear these days and see how much of this decorative stitching they're doing. There really is quite a lot of it. It's very popular right now. So there's just any number of things that you could do here. There are so many different pretty stitch patterns. I like this one. It looks like a chain all twisted, and that's a pretty one. And as long as it does this so beautifully by itself, you can kind of relax and just turn it a little bit now and then when you need to. But anyway, it's fun to see how much you can do. So this is what I've done to color block this and decorate it in the process. And here's that other stitch. So do a little of that. Use some of your scraps. Make something out of it. Now I have another one over here, and what I had to do on this, just an old t-shirt, I had a little bit of this fabric left over from some shorts, and I had a little bit of that fabric left over also from some. So I thought, why don't I make an extra shirt to go with that outfit by just putting them together and color blocking a little bit. What I've done there is join an inside-outside corner, and that's sometimes kind of tricky. I'm just going to come back to a straight stitch and be ready to stitch that. But what you need to do if you're going to join an inside and an outside corner, and I'm just turning this over so that I have a contrast. Ordinarily you wouldn't, you'd put it in the same one. But what I want to do first of all is with small stitches, smaller than the usual. Bring them down a little smaller because this is a reinforcement stitch. And ordinarily when you see this done on a pattern, they tell you to stitch right along the stitching line, right along the 5/8 or whatever your seam allowance is going to be. Stitch along that. I usually fudge just a little bit and come in here a little bit narrower so that I never will see it after the project is finished, because I don't want to rip out those tiny stitches. This way they'll never show if you come in here just a little bit. But right here at the corner, you want it to be exactly wherever your stitching line's going to be. And once that is clipped exactly to the corner, then you put the two pieces together. And so what I am doing here is putting the right side of my red piece to the right side of this is what you'd usually do, just so you can see what it looks like when it's finished. I'll do it the opposite way and use the wrong side for my good side. Okay, where you go wrong, where you go awry, for those of you who do, when you try to join an inside and an outside corner together, you don't get that corner up here far enough, and then it looks kind of rounded instead of really squared off. So I want to get this up exactly where my stitching line would be, right at the corner. And to make sure it stays in place, I'll put a pin right there so that it can't go wrong. So there's my pin right at the corner. It's going to be just perfect. And then it's just a matter of getting the edges of the fabric lined up on either side of that. So I'll line it up like this, and I'll line it up on the other side. And once we have all this pinned in place, then we can stitch this also. And for the long straightaway on this seam, you can have those stitches just regulation length. But when I come kind of close to the corner, I'm going to not leave them where they are. I will instead bring them down to a smaller stitch. So this is kind of a small stitch. I'm going to change feet here too. Okay, now that I have the regular sewing foot on, because I really didn't need to have that space under the platform, now I can do this a little easier. And I'm just making a 3/8 inch seam, so that pretty well makes the edge of the foot do the job. And when I get up to about where I have to take the pin out, that's where I am going to switch to a smaller stitch. So I'll just push my little button here so that it gives my stitch width and stitch length, and I'm going to bring it down to a smaller thing. One more. Because, and especially if it's Ravelly fabric, get down to small stitches so that it will come out just perfect. And I didn't need to have this many small stitches, but it's safer this way, so it's okay. And I'll just take my time as I get here close to the corner. And this is where I really like to have the needle down so that when I come into the corner, it'll hold it in place while I lift the foot with my knee pedal. Boy, I love that feature. I'm going to take one more stitch. I don't have quite enough. Okay, one more there. Lift the knee pedal, come over here, get the bulk out of the way, the other fabric, put the foot down again, and then I'm ready to come down this side. And as soon as I get away from that corner a little ways, then I can go ahead and put it back up to regular stitch length to do the rest of the seam. And when I get finished with that, we're going to have a perfect corner. So this is just something to remember, because there are so many cases where you need this inside-outside corner, and it really comes out looking just perfect if you simply pin that corner first and get it right up there. If you let it get lazy and relax, then you'll end up with kind of a sloppy-looking rounded one that you don't want to see. So that's how to do that. Well, I have some other color blocking here, and let's look at that. I've already made here some pants out of this interlock, just some summer cotton pants, and I had a piece left of that, but it wasn't quite big enough to make a t-shirt unless it'd be a very brief one with a bare midriff. That's about all I had room for here. Well, there are other colors in this. I'm taking the black, and I'm going to color black it, or color block it along with the black too, and I haven't decided how yet, so I haven't cut it up. But there are a whole lot of choices. I might just cut a yoke and have it 2 parts. I might cut this in several strips and put black in between it and have some bars there, have some stripes. If I would do that, I would probably make them different widths, make one wider and one a little narrower, just to make it more interesting instead of having regulation stripes along there. So there are all sorts of ways you might do that. I'll think about it a little bit before I do it. Here are some vests where there's some other color blocking, and you may or may not consider this color blocking. Now this one actually is just log cabin piecing, but it's not the standard log cabin. Notice how on this one I have a big block right here in the middle. And then as I started doing my log cabin around it, they're considerably different. Here's a narrow one, here's a narrower one still. Here I have kind of a wide one. So they're all different. I have some more of these. Here's another log cabin that I've done over here. And here I have a long narrow one, and then kind of a little fat one here, and a narrow one and a fat one. So they're all different. On the back I have some more of these log cabins, and these are done at an angle. So all sorts of ways you can do that. And while I was doing it, I thought, well, let's just put a couple of shark's teeth in there in the seam as I'm doing that. I don't know how to quilt, but I keep picking up pointers from the quilters I see sitting in my live seminars in the audiences, and by looking at what they're wearing, I get some good ideas. We all borrow ideas from each other, and this is the joy of going around and seeing other sewers every place. Now here's one I did a couple of series ago, and this was really a quickie. What I did here was cut out these vest shapes in a fusible interfacing, put it on the ironing board, fusible side up, just lay scraps of fabric overlapping all over the place, fuse the whole thing, and then just pick up all the loose edges and cut off what I didn't want, and then put some commercial bias tape covering those raw edges. So that's another way. You don't have to do seams that way, and you can do unusual edges. Here's another one that's color blocked. I was just using up scraps to make this very elaborate vest, and I love what I produced here. It was really fun. But what I've done here to join the seams is just turn under a little edge on some of these and top stitch it. You can't really see that it's top stitched because I did it real close to the edge, and I did it on this textury, wrinkly fabric so it doesn't show. But that's another idea for getting it together. And then here is one of my absolute favorite techniques that I just love. I'll use it again before this series is over, undoubtedly. But what this is that wonderful miracle stitcher that I get with my machine, or that I bought to go with my machine. And these are little pin-tucked pieces. They're all just laid on a backing. And then to cover up the joining, because there is no seam between those two pieces, to cover up the joining, I just did a lot of stitching with that miracle stitching, applying this variegated yarn. So there are all sorts of ways that you can do this. I just love to combine fabrics and add to them then the buttons and trims that look like they were made for each other. This planning stage, the beginning of creativity, is my absolute favorite part of sewing. Join me next time to see how it all happens.